The camera descends from space, drifting over the sunlit curve of the Mediterranean. The sea is calm, ancient. Below, a jagged coastline stretches out Tunisia, a land where empires rose and fell, but whose people always remained. It looks like Africa. It feels like the Middle East. It carries European echoes. But what if Tunisia isn't just like those places? What if it is all of them, written not just in its cities or languages, but deep within its blood? Beneath its shifting sands and stone ruins lies a story not found in textbooks, but in chromosomes. A story told by the bones of desert nomads, the bloodlines of Carthaginian sailors, and the silent code within millions of Tunisian cells. And that story begins in the most unexpected way, with no empire, no kings, just survival. Long before history etched names onto this land, there were people, hunters, gatherers, their faces unknown, their voices lost. They lived in what would later become Tunisia's harsh interior and fertile coast, carrying the genetic echoes of an even older world. Modern science calls them part of the Back to Africa migration, a wave of early humans who left Eurasia and then returned, bringing with them DNA that had mingled with Neanderthals. Yes, like modern Europeans and West Asians, Tunisians carry traces of Neanderthal ancestry, not because of recent mixing, but because their ancestors made that journey before history, before language, sometime between 12,000 and 40,000 years ago. This genetic fingerprint sets North Africans like Tunisians apart from sub-Saharan Africans, who lack these Neanderthal genes. But this wasn't a one-time movement. Waves came and went, each leaving a faint signature. Those early migrants settled and adapted, slowly becoming what we now call Berbers, the indigenous people of North Africa. And while the world would later label Tunisia by its invaders, Phoenician, Roman, Arab, French, the truth is, the foundation of Tunisia's DNA was laid long before ships arrived on its shores. If you could zoom in, past the ruins of Carthage, past the domes of Kairouan, you'd find a genome shaped more by accumulation than replacement. It's not a clean cut of eras, it's a layering of civilizations. Tunisia's DNA is sedimentary, built up in strata, each migration compressed into the next, each conquest leaving more memory than domination. This land was never just conquered, it absorbed. From the south rose desert clans, with Saharan ties. From the north, across the sea, came traders, soldiers, colonists. And at the crossroads of all this stood a people whose genes quietly recorded it all. Tunisia, in its essence, is a genetic manuscript, preserved not in books, but in bloodlines. And so, as the sun sets over the olive groves and old Roman roads, the question no longer is, what is Tunisia? The question becomes, who isn't? Long before the world had names for borders, flags, or faith, there was land, raw, untouched, and there were people moving across it. In what is now Tunisia, their footprints have faded. Their bones, if they remain, lie scattered beneath layers of time. But they left something behind far more permanent than stone tools or cave art. They left their code, written into the DNA of those who would come after. To understand Tunisian identity, you can't start with Carthage or even the first cities. You have to go deeper, to a time when the Sahara was still green, and the ancestors of today's Tunisians lived in small, migratory bands, resilient, silent, and unknown. Genetic traces reveal that Tunisia's earliest people were already a blend, not isolated, but formed through ancient movements that predate even recorded memory. Archaeogenetics now paints a haunting picture. Around 9,000 years before the First Kingdom rose in Mesopotamia, humans with East African ties were already present here, bringing with them a Sudanese Neolithic imprint. They were not the ancestors of sub-Saharan Africans. They were something else. A fusion. A beginning. And then, something unexpected happened. From the north, a population arrived, carrying Eurasian ancestry. This was the so-called Back to Africa migration. These were not conquerors, not settlers in the way we understand today. They were small family units, moving along coastlines, blending quietly into existing communities. But genetically, their arrival was seismic. They carried with them mitochondrial haplogroups that had never existed in North Africa before. U6, M1, and X1. These weren't random mutations. They were proof of a great returning, a second exodus from Eurasia into the African continent. And in Tunisia, this meeting of ancient Africa and returning Eurasians created a population unlike any other on the continent. The Berbers, often seen as the indigenous North Africans, would eventually emerge from this very fusion. Their DNA reveals both depth and contradiction. Paleolithic African roots mixed with Neolithic Eurasian ancestry. They weren't formed in isolation. They were shaped in crossroads. But this wasn't uniform. As groups settled in different ecological pockets, from the coastal cliffs of Jebel Nafusa to the mountainous dunes of Chinaini, isolation bred difference. Over thousands of years, micropopulations developed their own genetic rhythms. Founder effects began to shape communities. Mutations once rare became common within small villages, while other regions became living time capsules of pre-Islamic, even pre-agricultural genomes. Today, small Berber enclaves in Tunisia still carry that genetic silence. Hints of an age before writing, before cities, before even the idea of North Africa existed. In Jerba, for instance, specific gene markers have remained virtually untouched, protected by centuries of endogamy and geography. These aren't just outliers, they are echoes. Genetic time machines preserved in human form. And here's what makes this unique. While much of the world's ancient genetic story has been overwritten by conquest, colonization, and demographic collapse, Tunisia's oldest signatures never vanished. They adapted. They merged. But they endured. So when we ask what makes Tunisian DNA special, we must first remember that it was never built in one moment. It was whispered into being by migrations that left no ruins, by people who left no names, by a past that speaks not through monuments, but through mitochondria. Empires come and go. Their banners fade, their coins corrode, and their languages vanish into dust. But the human genome remembers what history forgets. In Tunisia, that memory is layered, not in pages, but in base pairs. Over millennia, this land was more than just a battlefield or a trade hub. It was a collector of civilizations. Every ship that docked on its shores, every army that marched across its deserts, every exile who found shelter in its valleys, each left something behind in the people. Not just influence, not just words, but blood. It began with the sea. The Phoenicians arrived not as conquerors, but as merchants. Carthage, their glittering city, rose from this coast, binding Tunisia to the Levant. Though they've long vanished, their eastern Mediterranean legacy still pulses faintly in the DNA, a ghost signature, detectable in certain Y chromosome haplogroups and ancient mitochondrial traces. Then came the Romans. Their empire may have fallen, but their soldiers and settlers did not simply leave. Genetic studies reveal European maternal haplogroups, such as H1, H3, and U5b1b, that align with Iberian and Roman colonial lineages. These weren't just genes passed through battle or conquest. They were woven through marriage, birth, and daily life under Roman Africa's long shadow. But Rome was only one chapter. When the Vandals crossed from Iberia and settled in North Africa, they brought with them lineages from Northern Europe, fleeting, perhaps, but recorded nonetheless in rare genetic markers still observed in some coastal populations. Their impact is subtle, often overshadowed by the more dominant Berber and Arab lines, but it lingers, like a whisper from a forgotten age. Then came Byzantium, a Christian empire ruling from the east, inserting its own officials and families into Tunisia's fabric. Though less visible in the genetic landscape, its presence contributed to the slow layering of Eastern European and Anatolian signals into the mix. Each wave didn't erase the previous. That's what makes Tunisia genetically unique. Its past was not rewritten with every invasion. It was overwritten. One civilization atop another, one ancestry folding into the next, like geological strata laid down by human history. And yet, despite centuries of overlay, the core remained. Genetic analyses show that even with these imperial contributions, the indigenous North African component persisted, not diluted, but recontextualized. The genome didn't lose itself. It expanded. Now, modern genetic mapping tools, principal component analysis, haplogroup tracking, and ancient DNA comparisons allow us to see what no historian could. Tunisia's population didn't just witness empire. It absorbed it, and in doing so, preserved it in a way no ruins ever could. There's a quiet poetry in this. The Romans no longer rule, but their daughters' mitochondria still circulate in the blood of modern Tunisians. The Phoenicians no longer sail, but their Eastern markers still echo in the male lineages of families who've never left their hometowns. Every empire thought it came to reshape Tunisia. None realized Tunisia was reshaping them, storing their presence not in temples, but in genomes. It began with the sound of hooves across the desert, an empire moving westward, not just with swords and scriptures, but with tribes, language, and legacy. The Arab arrival in Tunisia wasn't a single event. It was a tide, one that would wash across centuries, reshaping the cultural terrain without ever fully replacing what lay beneath. In the 7th century, when Islam surged out of the Arabian Peninsula, it reached North Africa with momentum. But Tunisia was never an empty canvas. The people here already carried thousands of years of identity in their blood. What followed wasn't deletion, it was integration. The first Arab conquerors brought more than faith. They introduced kinship structures, dialects, and a new social order. But it wasn't until the 11th century that the demographic shift deepened. Bedouin tribes, notably the Banu Hillel and Banu Sulaim, moved into Tunisia by the hundreds of thousands. Their migration wasn't just a ripple, it was a rupture. And yet, even in the face of this massive influx, something remarkable happened. Tunisia's genetic core remained intact. The Arabization of Tunisia unfolded largely as a cultural revolution, not a biological one. Modern Y chromosome data tells the story with unsettling clarity. Haplogroups like JM267, strongly associated with Arabian ancestry, became prominent, especially in urban and semi-nomadic populations. But this shift was uneven. In the countryside, particularly among populations that identified as Arab, something surprising was uncovered. Berber paternal lines still dominated. Entire towns that speak Arabic and claim Arab descent carry markers, pointing to indigenous North African origins. This is an anomaly, it's pattern. The genome speaks where memory forgets. Many self-identified Arab Tunisians are, at their core, Berbers whose ancestors adopted a new language, a new religion, and a new way of life, without ever leaving their ancestral blood behind. Nowhere is this clearer than in Kairouan. Long considered a religious and cultural center of Arab Islam in Tunisia, the genetic evidence reveals that a vast majority of its male lineages stem from the North African M81 haplogroup. These aren't recent converts. These are Arabized Berbers, generations deep, their heritage hidden beneath the spoken word. But the picture isn't uniform. Travel east to Westlicia, and the DNA shifts dramatically. Here, one finds the highest frequency of Middle Eastern paternal ancestry ever recorded in North Africa. The M70 haplogroup, rare elsewhere, dominates, offering a striking counterpoint to the rest of the country. This region tells a different story, of Bedouin clans that didn't just integrate, they settled, multiplied, and reshaped the genetic landscape from the ground up. And then, there's the tale of Msaken, a city with a whispered legend. Locals claim it was founded by 5 related men who migrated from West Asia in the 14th century. Genetic analysis confirms it. Multiple family lines in Msaken trace their male ancestry to the JL24 branch of JM172, a lineage rooted far beyond Tunisia's borders, yet alive in the daily life of its people today. These case studies prove one thing. The Arab imprint on Tunisia was powerful, but it wasn't monolithic. It varied by place, by tribe, by time. In some regions, Arab genes layered over the Berber base, like paint on ancient stone. In others, they sank deep, changing the foundation itself. What persisted through it all was not just genetic memory, but adaptability. Tunisia didn't resist Arabization, it reshaped it. The Arabic language flourished, the Islamic faith took root, but the people never forgot how to carry more than one identity in a single body. This is what makes Tunisia different. Its DNA didn't surrender to history. It negotiated with it. It's a genome of coexistence, not conquest. In the 17th century, as Spain tightened its grip on power, it unleashed a storm of exile. From the cities of Córdoba, Seville, and Granada, tens of thousands of Muslims and Jews, descendants of centuries of convivencia, were torn from their homeland. Some vanished into Europe. Others vanished into history, but nearly 80,000 found sanctuary on the North African coast. They came not as conquerors, but as refugees. And in Tunisia, they rewrote the story of exile into legacy. These Andalusians brought with them more than memories of Alhambra and the Arabic sciences. They brought a cultural vibrancy that Tunisia absorbed like parched earth takes rain. Within a generation, they transformed the intellectual, architectural, and artistic life of coastal cities. But their true imprint ran deeper, into the very DNA of the people. Mitochondrial studies reveal maternal lineages, such as T2, K1, and certain branches of U6, that align with Iberian populations. These genetic threads are woven most densely in families, tracing roots to Andalusian-descended quarters of Tunis and Testaur. These were not transient lineages. They settled, intermarried, and became one with the nation, not replacing, but expanding what it meant to be Tunisian. But even this influx did not leave a uniform genetic trail. Some Andalusian groups lived in tight-knit communities, preserving distinct surnames and traditions for centuries. In others, cultural identity blurred into the wider Tunisian fabric, making their presence invisible to the eye, but unmistakable in the genome. Then came the Ottomans, a different chapter entirely. They arrived not fleeing, but ruling. From the 16th century onward, Tunisia became part of the Ottoman sphere, but not as a province swallowed whole. Instead, it was governed by a local bey, loosely tethered to Istanbul, allowing a dual identity to flourish. The Ottoman influence left its strongest trace not in mass settlement, but in targeted demographic shifts. Most of the Turkish newcomers were male soldiers, sailors, and administrators. This left a genetic signature that was unbalanced, Y chromosome markers with Anatolian affinities, especially in coastal cities and military outposts, but little corresponding mitochondrial input from Turkish women. That imbalance speaks volumes. These were not communities of families. They were agents of empire, absorbed into the local population through intermarriage, often within elite circles. And so, the Ottoman legacy lives less in the masses and more in specific lineages, a faint genetic watermark on the pages of Tunisian society. Over time, Turkish words blended into Tunisian Arabic. Ottoman architectural features appeared in minarets and palaces. But genetically, the Ottoman impact was subtle, a light brushstroke, not a flood. The true complexity lies in how these two vastly different groups, one fleeing empire, the other enforcing it, both shaped the same land. The Andalusians brought the weight of memory, the Ottomans, the pressure of politics. And yet, both became part of Tunisia's genetic story, absorbed not as conquerors or colonizers, but as new layers in an ever-evolving identity. Today, descendants of these populations may look no different than their neighbors. Their DNA is part of a larger mosaic, indistinguishable without the precision of molecular analysis. And yet, the genome remembers. Every exile, every soldier, every intermarriage is etched quietly into the Tunisian code. What does it mean to carry the blood of the displaced and the powerful, of the hunted and the rulers? In Tunisia, it means you are both and more. Look beyond the desert, past the oases and salt plains, and deeper still, into the cellular level, and you'll find a story few have heard, yet all Tunisians carry. It's the story of Africa within, not just a continent, but a genetic force, coursing through the bloodlines of a people shaped by thousands of years of hidden connection. The presence of sub-Saharan ancestry in Tunisia isn't just a footnote. It's a central, though often overlooked, element of the nation's genetic identity. Modern genomic studies show that up to 39% of the average Tunisian's genetic makeup links directly to sub-Saharan Africa. This is not a result of one singular migration or event. It is the product of time itself. Long before camel caravans carved trade routes into the sand, the Sahara was a different world. Fertile, green, passable. During the African humid period, roughly 9,000 years ago, people moved freely between what we now call the Sahel and the Maghreb. They weren't strangers. They were neighbors, sharing food, culture, and yes, blood. Genetic analysis reveals that some of the oldest sub-Saharan markers present in Tunisia date back to that very era. These aren't remnants of recent history. They're ancient imprints, preserved like fossils in the human genome, whispering of a time when Africa was more connected than divided. But the story doesn't stop there. As centuries passed and climates changed, movement continued, this time shaped by survival, trade, and later, empire. The trans-Saharan trade routes became arteries through which not only gold and salt flowed, but human lives. Some came as merchants, others, tragically, as captives. And while history records the transactions, DNA remembers the people. Yet even in that darkness, a new kind of lineage emerged. Families formed across geographic and cultural lines. Generations grew, and with them, a distinctly North African expression of sub-Saharan genetics took root. One not found in West Africa or the Sahel, but uniquely Tunisian. What makes this ancestry even more fascinating is its uneven distribution. In the north-central regions of Tunisia, certain genetic markers, such as specific ALU insertions and CD4 ALU/STR combinations, appear in higher concentrations than in the south. It's a paradox. The desert edge, where one might expect the strongest African signal, shows slightly less. The inland heartland, where ancient settlements once flourished, carries more. And it's not just percentages. These genetic signals influence real biological traits. Variations found in immune system genes, metabolic pathways, and even disease susceptibility have been tied to sub-Saharan heritage. This isn't history for history's sake. It's relevant to the health and future of Tunisians today. Crucially, these African threads are not isolated. They're woven seamlessly with Berber, Arab, and Mediterranean elements, forming the distinct genomic fingerprint of Tunisia. Sub-Saharan ancestry doesn't sit on the margins of this identity. It sits at the center, holding hands with every other layer. There's power in that. In a world that so often divides Africa into north and south, Tunisia reminds us that the borders are artificial. The genes do not obey them, and neither did the people. Scattered across Tunisia's arid landscapes are villages that feel suspended in time. In the hills of Tukruna, on the island of Jerba, in the sandstone folds of Chinaini and Douaret, communities exist not just apart from the modern world, but apart from the genetic rhythm that shaped the rest of the nation. These are not just settlements. They are living archives. The people here speak in dialects that twist differently from the rest of the country. Their traditions, architecture, and clothing echo older orders. But it is inside their cells that the greatest divergence reveals itself. In a nation known for its blended genetic heritage, these Berber enclaves stand apart, not because they resisted history, but because they were shielded from it. What sets these groups apart is isolation, geographic, social, and genetic. Over generations, these communities practiced endogamy, marrying within the group, maintaining lineages with minimal external input. In genetic terms, this creates something extraordinary, founder effects. A small ancestral population gives rise to a genetically distinct microcosm, where certain traits, both beneficial and harmful, become concentrated. Genetic studies of these regions show clear divergence from Tunisia's broader population structure. Rare mitochondrial lineages appear more frequently. Certain haplogroups, nearly absent in coastal cities, dominate here. It's as if time itself slowed down inside these villages, allowing ancient markers to persist long after they vanished elsewhere. In Galala on the island of Jerba, researchers uncovered unexpected heterogeneity, evidence of multiple ancient lineages converging in a single place, but then remaining preserved. This diversity within isolation is paradoxical. It's not uniformity that defines these microcosms, but the crystallization of complexity into distinct genomic signatures. And these aren't merely academic curiosities. These populations have contributed immensely to our understanding of how human genetics evolves under constraints. Because of their relative homogeneity and traceable ancestry, scientists can more easily identify mutations tied to rare hereditary conditions. Tunisia's remarkable catalog of over 30 known recessive genetic diseases owes much of its mapping success to studies in these very regions. But the value of these microcosms isn't just medical or historical. It's existential. They remind us that identity isn't only shaped by fusion. Sometimes it's protected by boundaries, not out of resistance, but necessity. In a country defined by blending, these Berber islands are examples of continuity. Where cities were shaped by empire, trade, and conquest, These communities were sculpted by endurance. Their genetics tell a story not of migration, but of memory, guarded over centuries, passed from parent to child, like an unbroken thread. And yet, even here, change is arriving. Young generations leave for urban centers. Intermarriage is increasing. The walls of genetic isolation are dissolving, and with them, the last echoes of a pre-globalized genome. The question isn't whether these microcosms will fade. The question is, before they do, will we listen to what they have to say?